Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to another edition. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk on this segment about something that we coined or observed, must be maybe 15 years ago in our work and research, which we termed money disorders. And there's actually, I think initially we called them dysfunctional money behaviors. And then as our work progressed, we decided dysfunctional really wasn't a technical mental health term. And we broke them into money disorders and problematic money behaviors. And I'll explain a little bit more as to why. Let's just talk first a little bit about how a money disorder is formed. And whether it's a problematic behavior or money disorder doesn't matter. These are behaviors. And so what happens is there's some type of trauma or drama that happens in our life. Typically, this is when we're young. Typically, it's when we really have no filters. We have no way of knowing it's even a trauma. We have no way of judging that this is appropriate or inappropriate. But we experience some type of trauma. And as I explained in a previous podcast, trauma is on a continuum. There can be traumas that on a 1 to 10 are 1, and traumas that are 10. A 1, if it just happens once, probably is not going to hang around or really impact us. A 10 could impact us, absolutely happen once and impact us for the rest of our life. But you could have a series of 2, 3s, or 4 traumas that happen over and over again, maybe hundreds, thousands of times, that will form quite what they call a complex trauma. So in some way we experience a trauma. It can be around money or it can not be around money, which it's real interesting. I don't have a percentage on this, but it's just as common to find a money behavior, a money disorder that's problematic, that is hurtful, that actually has its roots in something that was not monetary to speak of. So we experience a trauma and then we make up a story. We rationalize why this is normal. We rationalize it. I need to not do this. In IFS language, parts are put into an extreme role because of the wounding. Typically with the trauma, there's shame, hurt, sadness, grief. There's typically some intense emotions. And the parts of us, our coping mechanisms, our ego, defend around this. And they'll come up with a story or a behavior or something that says when this happens, or to keep this from happening, here's what I need to do, because this is obviously the story. So we learn these lessons. The trauma may happen over and over. The story gets reinforced, the lessons get reinforced, and from that there is a universal truth that is taken from that. And in our work we often call these money scripts. And there are literally an unlimited number of money scripts. Most of us have 50 to 200 really predominant ones that operate 24/7. In most cases, they're undiscovered, subconscious, until we take time out to figure out what our systems believe about money. So these money scripts then turn into habitual behaviors, right? So we organize our behaviors around the belief system. And this is why you've heard me say so many times that there is no illogical behavior around money. Because underlying that seemingly illogical behavior is a perfectly logical money script. It's a perfectly logical response to the traumas, the stories we make up, and the money script. So this is a real important foundation to understanding where these money disorders come from and problematic money behaviors. So let's take a look at some of the ones that we identified in our early work. I think these might have been tweaked a little bit over time, but pretty much are intact. And we break them into money disorders and problematic money behaviors because the money disorders have their roots. They can be found in some form or fashion in the DSM-5. Now, the DSM-5 is kind of the Bible of determining disorders in the mental health field. The group of therapists and psychologists I hang around with don't have a high regard for the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is very medical, and the issue that many of your therapists have is they're not treating a disorder, they're treating a person, and they're working with a person, and they really don't want to label a person by their disorders. And where the DSM-5 really becomes necessary is when there's insurance involved in reimbursing the therapist for their services. Insurance requires a diagnosis of some type. So many of the therapists I know are what's called private pay, and so they don't take insurance, and the DSM-5 just has really not much importance, I would say, as far as in their practices. So that's my own personal bias is I kind of agree with all the therapists and psychologists that feel diagnosing people, it's really possibly not even healthy. All right, but anyway, not everybody agrees with that, so we like to give a little scientific foundation for some of these. And the first one would be workaholism. Workaholism is one of my system's drug of choice. I think it's pretty common, and it's one of the disorders that you really can get a lot of kudos for. You can be well paid for it, right? But the problem with workaholism is it just crowds out relationships. I know at the peak of my workaholism, I was probably working about 80 hours a week. And it was one of the contributing factors to the dissolution of my first marriage. So it's one of the looking good disorders. It can end up being very, very harmful. Compulsive buying is another one. Onomania, it actually has a term, onomania, which is just what it sounds like, just buying. Gambling is one of the disorders, which we're not talking about going out and enjoying yourself. I live in Rapid City, South Dakota. We have Deadwood, South Dakota nearby, which has legal gambling. So we're not talking about going up to Deadwood for an evening and you put a cap of $50 on what you're going to lose, and it's the night's entertainment. We're not talking about that. We're talking about compulsive, addictive gambling that actually harms or threatens a person's financial well-being. Hoarding is another. Again, hoarding isn't necessarily collecting things. It's hoarding things to the point that you can barely get through someone's house or your own house. Just a deep-seated fear, and becomes very disruptive to your lifestyle and relationships. And then the final one is financial dependence, where a person becomes dependent upon anything or any organization for their livelihood. I think of financial dependence, probably the most classic case is a child who remains dependent upon parents for well into adulthood for their livelihood or their sustenance. It can also be dependency on government, any type of financial dependency that can be deemed where a person is trapped or it's really unhealthy for the person. So these are the behaviors. Now, what I'm not doing in this segment is giving you any ideas yet on how you overcome these behaviors, these disorders. My intent basically today is to just expose these to you, and with the idea of, as I talk about them, to see which of these may be present in your life. Quite frankly, I don't think I've ever met somebody that didn't have a money disorder or problematic money behavior. And truly, if you have none of these, I would be very interested in hearing from you. We may come to one that might explain why you don't have any of these. Let's just talk about it because it's the first one in problematic money behaviors. It's called financial denial, right? So if you say, I don't have any of those, maybe that's the first place to explore is, do you just have a part of yourself that is unwilling to take inventory or look at it or feel so much shame in admitting that you have any type of problematic money behavior disorder that it just won't let you go there? So that's kind of what financial denial is just a complete, it's like a wall, it's like a sheet that's thrown over us where we just can't see. And we don't know. I guess it's not that we don't know that we don't what we don't know. It's that we don't want to see what is there. We don't want to look at the man behind the curtain. So that is a definite problematic money behavior, because if we're unwilling to look, if we're unwilling to admit that we may have behaviors and search for these because of the huge amount of shame that's associated with that, wow, our progress is stopped at really becoming well. And of course, somebody in denial thinks they're well and sees no reason to press on and maybe have a harder look. What would be the clue that a person might need to take a harder look at themselves? Well, it would be if there's some type of financial pain or some type of things that financially aren't going right, or continual excuses that are being made for things that don't go right, especially pointing the finger at everybody else and being in a place of financial victim, which would be classic in financial denial. It's everybody else's fault. It's society's fault. It's my employer's fault. I once had a friend, he went to work for somebody and boss was terrible. And he quit that job and went to work for another company and ran into another terrible boss. He quit that job and went to work for another company. That boss was terrible. And after about 5 rounds of this, it became pretty clear that it wasn't the boss that was the problem. So trailheads like that in your life might give a clue to there's some financial denial going on. Another problematic money behavior that I really wrestled with when I first considered this is underspending. Now, this is the Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge, which is a book I co-wrote with the Claunces. We took a look at Ebenezer Scrooge, who is a classic underspender. We're not talking about healthy frugality. We're not talking about living on less than you make, which is necessary to build wealth. We are talking about underspending to the point that a person's safety becomes at risk. I remember a client who is a classic underspender. In retirement, could have been spending 3 times what they were. In visiting their house, they had boards in their deck that were loose. They had wires that were exposed. They were starting to have trouble driving, and they would not get a newer car that would have all sorts of safety features. In fact, today, right, we can buy a Tesla that has an element of self-driving to it. So, and they could have afforded all of this. So that is classic underspending, to where you underspend to the point of really hurting yourself. I mean, it could be to the point of not spending for leisure, not spending for things that you really enjoy. So this is hurtful underspending. And then, of course, on the other side of that, we have overspending, which is an epidemic in the United States. Somewhere around 80% of people would have to borrow money or sell something to come up with $1,000. I think last time I looked, and these stats could be about 5 years old, that only 9% of Americans could or had $100,000 liquid saved in retirement plans or taxable accounts or something like that. So overspending is a really almost epidemic. Financial enabling, remember we talked about dependence being one of the disorders. Well, financial enabling is on the other side of dependence. That classically would be the parent who keeps giving to the kids. And I could tell you a bunch of war stories of parents who just kept giving to their kids to the point they didn't even need to get jobs. And it's hurtful, oftentimes hurtful to the child, and it's hurtful to the parent as well. This can come out of a load of shame and guilt, maybe guilt around the child's upbringing, and then trying to make it all right by giving them money in adulthood. The causes can be huge. Just know if you chronically give money to a child, this could be a sign of financial enabling. We're not talking about once you gave a child $10,000 and you've never done that again, or something of that fact, but we're talking about could be a child that is always in need of money, and perhaps the parent is always there to bail the kid out. That would be classic. There's a vow of poverty. That is a behavior that would say money's unimportant, and actually there's a spiritual, emotional character quality and a positive quality that I am taking this vow of poverty. It would almost kind of be a little bit around underspending, but it comes with a different intent. The intent is not saving money or building money. A vow of poverty, probably you've given away all your money. It can get an air of spiritual superiority. In some of the areas I run in, therapists may call this spiritual escape. Not necessarily, doesn't mean everybody with spiritual escape is taking on a vow of poverty. But it's often seen, quite frankly, in the helping professions, mental health professions, in the clergy, ministry, some of these areas. Then there's financial enmeshment. This is inappropriate boundaries, inappropriate sharing of financial information and problems with children. And this can cause a number of problems, obviously. Think of it as information that the adult needs to be talking to another adult about, not an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, etc. Then there's squandering of sudden windfalls, big one, whether it's an inheritance, lottery, signing bonus, any type of large amount of money that comes a person's way. It's more often than not, this money is squandered. And there's research out there that shows in 3, 4, 5, 7 years, a lot of these windfalls are gone. And then finally, the last one is poor financial decisions, which can really encompass a lot of things. But again, we're not talking about a poor financial decision. The average millionaire makes, I think it's 3.8, maybe it's 3.1, really bad financial decisions in their life. The average non-millionaire makes 1.6. All right? So people that accumulate wealth make twice the bad decisions of people who don't accumulate wealth. So it's not about making a few bad decisions. I think, why is that? Well, I think it's necessary to take some risk, right? If you're going to accumulate wealth. But we're talking about here chronic bad decisions. Bad decision after bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. All right? So if you see that in yourself, again, this is a problematic money behavior. So those are the behaviors. And let me just say, what underlies all of these behaviors is some type of emotional wounding, some type of pain. Because all of these behaviors are a way to try and medicate, resist, or keep the trauma or the pain encapsulated or from happening again. So the key to addressing and actually modifying, turning these behaviors around to helpful behaviors is really understanding how they formed, where they came from, and what all those stories are that were made up. And really getting curious with those parts of us that were wounded so that we can really understand and address this. And that's a whole nother episode that we will get to. So thanks for joining me. We'll see you again. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.